What's up, everyone? Welcome. We are live right now on Cannabis, and if you're joining us on YouTube, thank you so much for joining us. We have a great episode today. We're going to be talking all about Bokashi. Bokashi, sometimes referred to as Bokashi compost. It's a thing that you're going to sprinkle on top of your soil or maybe a compost pile or all sorts of things. We're going to get into all the details, but it adds a bunch of fun microorganisms and all sorts of goodness into your mix. So we're going to be getting all into it, but before we do, I need to get into some shout outs. First off, shout out to everyone in the Cannabis community. We do giveaways to our members only community. Folks can join us in the app. We live stream all of our interviews so people can join us live and ask questions. And like I said, we do seed giveaways. We just gave away like 30 something packs of Neptune Farm seeds that we got recently, and we'll be giving out even more to come. So if you want to be a part of that, search Cannabis in the App Store, download the app, and use the code BUZZ for your first month free. Also, shout out to Lost Coast Plant Therapy. You need to get yourself some IPM spray to take down bud rot, powdery mildew, kill some bugs that are on your plants. Check out Lost Coast Plant Therapy. It's a really great product. I've put up some recent videos on our channel because I use it in my outdoor grow. I actually just used it last night because the bud rot is already starting to creep out in the outdoor grows for the buds, the ones that get really big and bunched up. So yeah, I believe in the product, and I definitely encourage you to check it out if you are dealing with some issues. And I appreciate Lost Coast Plant Therapy's support. And then last shout out from me before I throw it over to JR is to SacredThreeMushrooms.com. You want to grow your own fungi at home and you need some spores, go to SacredThreeMushrooms.com. Use the code CANNABUZZ for 10% off. They have home grow kits. They've got everything together that you could need. They've got it all for you, and how-to videos. They've got it all. So if you want to go down the rabbit hole and grow your own, go to sacred3mushrooms.com. And now over to JR.
Thanks, Q. We're going to talk some Tiki announcements. He has his killer strains from outer space. He's got a variety of offerings available, and it's 50% off the site, TikiSeeds.com. Plus, you get a free spooky pack of unreleased crosses with every order, and that's with TikiSeeds.com. And then Neptune. We're going nugs deep with Neptune. He has his weekend super deals up to today. And this is the advantage of joining the live, as you get to hear about these drops if you haven't hopped on NeptuneSeedbank.com. But he has 25% off Romulan, 30% off someone I really non-California genetics. Sorry, guys. And then Red's original quality flour, he's got 40% off those packs as well. So those are his weekend deals. Head up NeptuneSeedbank.com.
That's awesome. Romulan genetics. That's a legend right there.
Yeah.
I know Noob Grows out here from the DGC. He was growing Romulan
Yeah.
for a while.
Yeah.
Some
Like
really
the
great Romulan.
original variety, too. That was really good.
Yeah. Well, Evan, before we get too distracted about friend's weed,
Go down the genetic rabbit hole there.
yeah, about Romulan,
Yeah.
because it was a good one. Evan, thank you so much for joining. I'm really excited about to talk to you today. Evan's from Southern Oregon Bokashi. Like I said at the top of the show, Bokashi adds a lot of great things to the mix, and we're going to be talking all about it. Talk what is Bokashi, how you can do it. But before we get too far into things, let's welcome you to the show, Evan, and then tell us about how you fell in love with the plant and how did that get you to where you are today.
Well, thanks for having me. Definitely appreciate it. So with cannabis, it's definitely been kind of a lifelong love and use as far as initially smoking it in the past, and then kind of went to more tinctures and topicals currently. It's definitely one of those things where I tell people it's more of a gateway plant than a gateway drug, in the sense where it got me into growing other types of plants. So that was, I feel like, kind of where where that plant, kind of brought me to and got me into organic farming and got me into like learning about like nutrient deficiencies and probiotics and all other type of things too. Um, yeah.
And so now that you've been in Southern Oregon for quite some time, and a lot of people know about, the Emerald Triangle as the Trinity, Nevada, and Humboldt and all that. But can you kind of talk about the legacy of Southern Oregon and maybe let people know kind of about the metric tons that have left that region of our state?
Legally or
Hey, no one has to say anything about that. But I mean, really,
that's why it's a gray area.
give the people an idea of that legacy time, those legacy times.
Sure. I mean, it's been an interesting transition here. I've been in Southern Oregon about, I think, 16 years now. I've been doing Bokashi like 14 and, interacted with a lot of different growers through the, grow stores and directly to the rec markets, as far as the rec growers and such like that. And it's been interesting to see the change over time that's happened, particularly this being such a rural area that, excuse me, it always was kind of cannabis was always here as an industry. Obviously kind of more of a, black market style, in the past, whereas, people basically living in rural environments and, people much like Northern California, where you had hippies or homesteaders or however you want to put it, moving up there and, growing herb to basically support themselves. Same thing kind of happened here up in these little valleys and such. And then, the medical thing that came, I mean, that definitely, changed the game for a lot of people here as far as legitimizing it, a bit more so than being, total black market style. And then, the recreational scene and, that was an interesting change here as well. It seems like that whole scenario has kind of peaked in certain ways because I mean Oregon can only it can grow a lot of herb here, particularly in Southern Oregon, which a lot of it's outdoors. So we have the long season, and so it seems like there's the rec market is kind of stabilizing. I guess it went through a really hard time for a little while, and now it's kind of getting to this point where it's stabilized, and some people are actually making it through, and making good decent money off it, farming essentially. But as far as quantities, I mean, it's always hard to say. I mean, I mean, the list you sent me of the questions, beforehand, I remember hearing about a bust that happened where it was like 500,000 pounds of
Yeah, I remember that
it was
down in
like
Jefferson
in one
County.
warehouse. Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
And that was like one warehouse, there where I live, where I have the shop and stuff, it's the Applegate Valley. And it's basically like wine and weed is pretty much what it is. Especially when the hemp thing came. I mean, pretty much everything was just like people were like, "Oh, this is last year. I'm gonna throw more plants in," and this and that. And it was just, and then there was like the hemp thing, where people like
Yeah.
collectively harvesting their hemp. So it's been an interesting thing over time, and it's definitely slowed down. I mean, Oregon, it just there's not, without the being able to send it across the borders legally, it's kind of slowing down the production and the people that are actually wanting to do it here. So, but I feel it's always going to be here. I mean, it's an incredible growing environment. I mean, for outdoors in particular. So,
Yeah, for sure.
That's really cool.
So let's talk about Bokashi. How did Bokashi kind of come into your life? What's kind of the backstory there?
so I used to live on the Big Island in Hawaii. And this is once again probably like 17, 18 years ago now. And there was a guy there named Cab that I started working for, and he had a company called Island Herbs, and he was one of the Bokashi producers over there. I actually worked for him doing veganic landscaping. Was using like spirulina as his like NPK source, and doing a lot of stuff where we're just like, oh, that doesn't make sense whatsoever, and just plants will love it. Yeah, that's where I actually learned about neem from neem oil and used neem cake and as well. And So I learned a bunch from him about that, about Bokashi, and just kind of like I've been a home brewer for 20 plus years now, and worked in commercial breweries and So I've always been into fermentation and just kind of, interested in that world, probiotics, et cetera, and being a plant person too, getting into the microbiology and just kind of geeking out in those realms. So I initially started making bokashi actually out of my spent malts from brewing all grain beer at home. And so,
That's brilliant. That's
yeah,
brilliant.
yeah, I took the good stuff off and then, use the rest for, for basically making fertilizer probiotics with. And it kind of evolved from there. I mean, it was, kind of a necessity thing when I started the business. It's kind of like, all right, well, what am I going to do with my life? Essentially, hit the like 28, I think it was, and like Saturn returns basically, and everything kind of fell apart. I'm like, all right, well, I can do this, or this, and started the business, and it just kind of went off. So, yeah, it's been an interesting ride. It's definitely the longest I've had the Bokashi any business, so.
That's cool. So, let's kind of get into the meat and bones of Bokashi. I kind of wanted to design this interview to kind of give people those, hit points on the benefits and the uses of Bokashi. So, kind of let people know how, and just overall, how does it improve your soil?
So a couple different ways. Primarily, I mean, with the super soil mix that you were making, if you're doing organic amending, your soils with like dry amendments or manure or things of that accord, it's just going to facilitate that breakdown and that bioavailability of it, and particularly as, once again, with, reusing soil and, the roots and stuff in there, it helps break down the roots a lot faster. It makes that into, organic material for the plants, creating like humates and humic acids and fulvic acids and such. And so I typically suggest to people a couple different modalities for using bokashi, at least with as a soil amendment. One is to integrate it into the potting mix as far as like, mixing the soil. If you're reusing soil, you had any issues with it, like any like crown stem rot or like, root rot issues, I would say hit it with a high nitrogen and add bokashi to it and let it cook out for a couple weeks, like 2 to 3 weeks. Wet it down obviously, and keep it covered, more of an anaerobic style fermentation. And that will, allow it to heat up and cool back down, and that will kill off a lot of those pathogenic organisms that are there. And then when you're doing your transplanting, sprinkle a little bit in your hole, small amounts more often than one large amount is kind of my mantra with it, essentially. And it works in conjunction. It's beneficial bacteria, primarily. So it works in conjunction with mycorrhizae, which is, obviously fungus, root fungus. So they're free living bacteria, so they can kind of be in and around the root or the rhizosphere. They don't have to be like right on the rhizosphere, like
Like the fungi do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
And so, how are those? Like, because we always say that, the delivery methods are ionically or enzymatically. And so, how are those bacteria and those mycorrhizal networks communicating to deliver those types of nutrients?
oh, buddy. It's so bacteria is one of those things where, if you follow kind of like the soil food web like idea, like Elaine Ingram's soil food web style, bacteria are like the base of the food web, and mycorrhizae or fungi are the next level up. Bacteria primarily, I think it's like they take in about like 5 or 6 to 1 nitrogen to carbon, as opposed to fungi, which is like a 3 to 1. And that's significant because what's essentially happening is that these bacteria are going through and they're just like consuming, they're basically eating all this stuff up and they're holding it in their bodies and they're breaking stuff down to like, by, breaking the carbon bonds and, that's releasing this exothermic heat that's occurring during that, composting process per se. This is kind of a tangent, but nevertheless, so like the nitrogen that's held up in the bodies of these microorganisms, they're basically as they die back over time, what's called lysing, they split open and release that nutrients to other areas above them in the food web, essentially. So the fungi being one of them, they're basically creating these like precursor like plant growth hormones.
Chelated, almost like we would think in the hydro days, chelated nutrient uptake ready or ready for the other organisms or fungi to start doing their thing with it.
Exactly. Yep, totally. They're a pioneer species essentially, and with the mycorrhizae, from my understanding, it takes a little while for those endo and ecto mycorrhizae to really adhere to the roots and actually be
Yeah.
beneficial. And particularly if, with like high phosphorus environments, they go dormant. Whereas like bacteria, they can handle, particularly the ones in Bokashi, they can handle like high saline environments, so salt-based fertilizers. They can, handle, high temperatures, and they can handle high phosphorus, and, actually they're phosphorus solubilizing. So there's, a lot of the benefits there beyond like, what's initially kind of just the breaking down of nutrients, so to say, so there's, yeah. And then, with Bokashi too, as I said before, as far as like use it for transplanting, it's a lot of B vitamins from the yeast that are in there. That'll help with the transplant shock in particular. So what I've noticed is like instead of having like maybe like a 3 to 5 or a couple of days of like transplant shock, even using like kelp and such, it's maybe like a day or two, as far as like transition time. Helps with like creating secondary and tertiary root systems, which are crucial for, once again, nutrient uptakes. Creating the soil aggregation through like creating glomulins, creating these like kind of like soil matrix, through like the sugars and exudates that they're providing, creating these colonies there. So, and essentially, uh, top dressing, is a great way to use it too. Mixing it with other amendments, alfalfa being a great one. If you're using that, keeping it away from the base of the stalk, and doing teas with it as well.
And
So,
just kind of on that offshoot subject of IMOs, with my Bokashi, if I am kind of doing a top, is that also going to be attracting the local IMOs in to join the party as well?
uh, probably. I mean, obviously there's microorganisms everywhere, and there's definitely kind of jumps on the idea of how Bokashi kind of works as far as like it associating with other organisms and kind of creating these like, fertile areas or these kind of communities to work together in. So I don't know if per se it would attract them, but it would definitely, like, when they would get in there, it would help foster them, I would assume.
Well, this is kind of jumping ahead a little bit, but you kind of brought up that subject of how bacteria are a little more robust and are kind of easier to apply and get going, whereas the fungi networks need to be established very young, at the very young age. And so, getting on to the bacterial part of it, when those bacterial like teas you can make, little cheat teas, like in the past, I would use Insect Frass, Big Bloom, and Recharge, which is fungi and bacteria loaded stuff, as a little cheat tea. Can you kind of talk about using Bokashi as a cheat tea to kind of load up your bacterial counts and get the party started?
Sure, sure. Yeah, so there's a couple different methodologies that people use. I mean, obviously with like compost tea, or which kind of maybe what you're talking about, but more bacterial oriented. I mean, there will be fungus in there. The hyphae might not be establishing or germinating, so to say. It's where it might not be germinating with the fungi, but so with bacteria, with Bokashi in particular, it's a facultative anaerobe, which is kind of a something to kind of be conscious of, in the sense that it can live in an aerobic or anaerobic environments. So, particularly if you're, trying to do like an active aerated compost tea style, people are typically bubbling it or aerating it, for, say 12 to 24 hours or something like that. And they're adding different nutrient sources like fish or molasses and things of that accord. You can also do kind of like a leachate style tea with it, which is called kind of like a quick tea. If you take like, Bokashi and, maybe add some molasses in there, which is always a great bacterial feed because it's kind of like a simple and complex sugars kind of combined. And that's, and then obviously fish emulsion or whatever else you kind of want to add in there as far as like NPK source. And then,
Yeah.
essentially just like stir it around in a 5 gallon bucket, make a concentrate and don't aerate it, just like try to get it out on the soil, that liquid out on the soil within, a couple of hours, ideally, and let
Yep.
the soil kind of deal with it. So,
Yeah, it's to me, I just say microbes, poo, and sugar. If
sure.
you can get the microbes, poo, and the sugar, do kind of a quick tea and water in like a res feeding, it's going to do good stuff.
Yeah, and if you're doing, because doing teas and doing top dressing is kind of some not like kind of a similar style. I mean, obviously, if you're doing active area compost teas, the intent is to breed aerobic organisms.
Yes.
Which
Yes.
which the Bokashi being, swinging both ways, being a facultative anaerobe, it'll work in that scenario. So excuse me. So it's, it just depends on, what scale you're at and how, easy you want to make it. I mean, I feel like, I like to do a lot of top dressing personally. I find it a lot easier to do. I do have a reservoir, like a, 300-gallon reservoir here for my plants. And, it's something I do every so often, but, typically I do super soil and just kind of like juice the soil up, do top dress and just kind of water proper, and,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know, they definitely love it. A little here and there, especially in flower, obviously kind of make them push, but um, yeah.
So when you're top dressing, are you covering it with like a mulch layer or something like that? Because I also noticed that you were saying you when you top dress, you're mixing it in with something else. You mentioned, I think, alfalfa. So yeah, like I'm just thinking as an outdoor grower, when I'm top dressing, it's best to probably have something on top of it so that it lets like the worms and other stuff kind of do their thing. Do you have any kind of suggestions or how you typically approach this?
So typically I suggest if you're doing top dress, like you can leave it on the top of the soil and kind of like kind of scrape it
Yeah.
in a little bit with your fingers if you wanted to. I like to do mulching, primarily if they're, especially when the plants are younger. Like I have 400-gallon smart pots I do my stuff in. And, when the plant's in the middle of the pot and only taking up maybe like, a tenth of the pot per se of like the, shade wise, having that mulch zone with the bokashi underneath there is going to definitely facilitate the roots come up to that surface area, and keep it a lot cooler. So, and then eventually over time, I kind of pull back the mulch layer essentially and just use that to kind of top dress without the mulch layer on there, even with the bokashi. So,
Yeah. Yeah, we're recording now at what, mid September, and just with my outdoor plants in the pots, it's just so amazing to me. The roots just like take over when you scratch over, you scratch off like kind of the top layer. Just see the
mhm.
roots are just everywhere. It's just amazing, and they kind of grow into whatever you're top dressing. And just yeah, I'm excited. I'm gonna have to try bokashi. So what would you say bokashi is adding to the soil? You mentioned you can use it as like an amendment type situation. Beyond the microbes, is it adding any other sort of like properties to the soil or any other kind of benefits?
There is a little bit of NPK there to it. I think the last time I got it tested was been excuse me, a second ago, was like I think it was a 1.4, 1.7, like 1 or something like that, as far as NPK wise is concerned. And I add like rock dust in there. Like I'm a big fan of rock dust as far as the micronutrients, and also I add some fish meal in there, just like during the fermentation process. I kind of feel like, my viewpoint on agriculture in general is essentially like you take from the ocean, you take from the mountains, you combine the both of them together, and you have like all the macro and micronutrients you need to sustain, life in general, as well as like feed the microbes, which are eventually feeding the plants too. So, so it's uh, but yeah. There's then there's obviously other, PGRs, like plant growth regulators that are there as far as like gibberellic acid and dolichoceic acid that are being, generated by these bacterias. There's a whole slew of like other things there that, as far as like, growth regulators that, I'm not even aware of per se, they're still kind of, the science is still out there on it as far as, what they're studying on it. So
And so, how does Bokashi kind of help with water retention? Because something I've already noticed just in my very little experience with living soil is that the water retention is different. And so, can you kind of give people some tips on water retention and maybe how to manage?
I mean, I would say that since the bacteria, the Bokashi, the bacteria that are there, form these, aggregates there through this, like when they form colonies in the soil, they're creating these like, aggregates or, kind of chunks of soil essentially from the glomalin, the sugars that are, holding all that stuff together. So it's that itself is basically it's creating porosity, but it's also creating this kind of sponge as well there. So I find like sometimes like, with with using bokash, like you have to be kind of conscious of how much you're watering, obviously with any plant, but because sometimes it can kind of create like water holding a bit more so from those like kind of like sponge like aspects of the soil per se. Depends, I guess, on aggregation too, of like as far as perlite or pumice, et cetera, that you're adding in soil or things of that accord as well. But if it's like a straight cocoa or a straight cocoa style, it might kind of create that a bit more so as far as just like a water holding. So
I do know that is why we're on that subject of aeration. I do know a lot of folks here in Oregon are having issues with rice hulls and arsenic levels. They're having a hard time sourcing any kind of rice hulls that are not having presence of arsenic. So as far as like that, managing that moisture, if you are in like living soil beds or even outdoors, do you ever recommend moisture, any kind of moisture meters or anything like that?
I think this is probably the best one you got, and it's so that's usually kind of what I do, and obviously looking at the plant, if the plant's kind of like doing the old like goddess praise thing, and looking happy, it's just being observant. It's I mean, it depends on your skill level, and obviously, just kind of looking at the plant, I think, and being observant, is probably the best way. But
Yeah.
moisture meters help. It's like any other tool. I wouldn't say be reliant upon it. It's much like any other technology, it fails. So
Would you say that Bokashi has any sort of like pest or pathogen resistant properties or things that it's giving my plants?
yeah, so there's definitely some evidence of that the lactic acid bacteria is helping with like powdery mildews and like botrytis issues. I had, years ago, I had two people that one guy from Seattle that was a long time herb grower, probably 20 plus years. And he was just like, dude, I top dressed with Bokashi and like I haven't had powdery mildew on my indoor plants. I was like, all you do is top dress? Like you don't do teas? He's like, yeah. So, and then somebody else, in like Salem area told me the same thing, and I was kind of blown away because I would assume more the fact of like doing teas and actually getting on the surface, the leaf surface to help, basically coat that and kind of create that, the beneficial bacteria instead of, the, pathogenic or, bad
Right.
bacteria,
So it is definitely having an immunal response within the plant to help it fight and stuff like that. But what about one thing I'm really ignorant about is secondary metabolites. I don't understand fully what that means and how Bokashi, if you could help us, might help in that process.
So, secondary metabolites are essentially, um, you know, okay, I'll use an example here. So basically, yeast, they use for beer brewing, it's breaking down sugars as a byproduct. It's creating ethanol and CO2, and it can create different like esters and things like that as well. So like these, um, they basically are creating these secondary metabolites from the as like their primary metabolism is breaking down the sugars. The secondary metabolism, if I'm remembering correctly, is the ethanol production that's on the back end there. There's also like things where like like nitrogen fixation that can occur that that could be kind of like a secondary thing where it's like it's not always the case that that it happens. It's kind of like a byproduct of the lack of nitrogen there and through these other aspects. So um there's
Interesting, because I always hear them talk about the boost of secondary metabolites through like immunal responses. If the plant's super healthy and everything is coming in how it's asking for it, then it's producing the secondary metabolites that give us aroma and flavor and all those things that we're
terpene
seeking.
production.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
I mean, there's the the benefit from these using bacteria is to basically break down that stuff is that they have different antioxidants, releasing these different minerals and such to the plant to create these, to create those types of terpenes and that the plant can
The
be.
stuff we want.
Yeah, totally. I mean,
Right?
you think about it too, it's like, even in per se like an indoor environment, like when you were growing before, there was always, some type of bacteria or fungi that was working there. Even if you weren't per se inoculating it, intentionally. That, there's always, we as humans are more bacteria and fungi as far as by weight and DNA, etc. On us and our guts, all around us. I mean, it's we would not survive without it. So and the plants are also in the same kind of category. They need this association and these releases and I feel particularly in organic systems. I know that one of the questions you have is about using it for synthetic fertilizers. And I've kind of jump ahead here, but like with organic systems, having there's a couple of different ways, like heat being one of the ways to process to create bioavailability of organic materials, or enzymatically, and the bacteria are basically doing it at low temperatures enzymatically, essentially, breaking the nutrients down and making them more bioavailable. So uh alfalfa being a case where the tricantanols have to be basically fermented, the through like the OL on the end is alcohol essentially, so they have to be fermented to actually become bioavailable, which is a great for root and shoot growth. So
Yeah, and shout out to all those Jadam and KNF guys that are pushing that envelope, you know what I mean?
Mhm. Yeah, it's definitely uh the Jotum thing and the Korean natural farming is, essentially where the Bokashi, originated from in certain respects. So there's definitely a lot of
In
history
principle, right?
in principle, and it's there's a lot of different stories to it, but yeah, I feel personally that's kind of where a lot of this came from, was that kind of like the nature farming and understanding where the association between plants and and microbes and and associating that with humans and microbes too. So
And I always make that joke in Korea, it's not called Korean natural farming, it's just called farming.
yeah, yeah.
So, bokashi can also be used at home in the kitchen. I think people are probably there's some people out there that are already using it and they don't realize it because they get it as some sort of like microbes in a thing that they put into their in-home composter or whatever it is. Can you talk about how people could use bokashi at home in their maybe their little compost bin?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, traditionally, that's kind of where how Bokashi or why Bokashi was kind of created, or one of the more popular applications for it, particularly in like cities, where it's like there's not a lot of room to do, composting food scraps. And so uh, the system I used to run was basically like a 5 gallon bucket with a gamma lid, which is like the resealable lid style, and just basically layer some dry bokash on the bottom, and then you can do like fruit peels and like pastas or whatever else, meat scraps, dairy products which are usually not compostable. or not like suggest to be compostable in like typical composting systems. And then just kind of lasagna layer the bokashi and those material in there, over time and compact them as you go. There's other people have come up with different designs where you can kind of like have like, drains on the bottom that has a false bottom. You can drain out the liquid, and that liquid has essentially the probiotics that are, they're draining out, as well as all the vitamins and minerals and stuff from the exudates, essentially leachates, whatever you want to call it, from the compost bin that you can dilute out and use, for various purposes, whether, feeding it your plants, or, I had one guy that was doing it. He's putting down his sink because he kept on, having issues with his sink clogging, and we'd have to like pull the whole sink apart like every like 6 months and clean it out. He's like, dude, I started putting the juice down there. He's like, never had to do it again. Just like started like the microbes were just eating all that stuff up. So
and it does that leachate coming out, is that going to have NPK charge, or is it just going to be loaded with bacteria? Is that, and then when you say you got to dilute it, can you kind of talk about dilution rates or best practices?
Yes, 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 and yes. But yeah, the first two questions, yes and yes. And then dilution wise, I think I believe it's like 1 to 100, if I remember correctly. As far as dilution wise, there's quite a bit of literature out there online too about bokashi composting. But I want to say it's about 1 to 100. And it depends, it depends on like kind of what you're, like NPK wise, it depends on what you're, putting in there, obviously, and the bacteria.
Yes, right. So you could load it with a bunch of pumpkins and peaches and get more of a fruiting phosphorus loaded goo, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I didn't even think about that as far as like even just like making your own fertilizer style with like, okay, I see where we're going with this.
Nice.
Yeah. Well, and yeah, so you could probably cater in that way as far as like inoculating that out, and and squeezing out the juice, and um yeah. I also like people, another use for it I find is like people with like kitty litter boxes, or like, dog waste, etc. I remember I did this class for like the master composters here in Southern Oregon, and
Cool.
I was living in the city, or in town, and I had to go pick up the dog poop, every other week or so. And so I would just have like these I had a 5 gallon bucket with like a plastic bag inside, and basically go around, and we had two dogs, one of mine and the lady I was renting from, and throw the poop in there, and then throw some bokashi on top, and kind of like seal it up, seal the bag, just kind of twist it down and put a lid on it, and come back 2 weeks later and fill it up again. And so I go to this class, and I'm, talking about bokashi composting, and, and kind of towards the end, I was like, hey, like, I have this like bucket of like composted dog poop, and I figured everybody was gonna be like, like everybody was like so stoked on it.
Right.
Like there was like it was like the hit of the class. They were like, everybody was like checking it out, and it was, no smell. It was all like starting to break down, and which is, one of the benefits from that, is like, once again, the kitty litter, dog poop, human manure. Like I've had people that have like composting toilets, that it works great in. It helps like eliminate the smell, the flies. You can use it in conjunction with the, sawdust or wood chips or whatever, or cocoa, whatever you want to use. So people with off-grid scenarios, it has a lot.
I was gonna say, shout out to homesteaders.
Yeah, and then septic tanks too. I mean, if you flush it down your toilets, help inoculate your tanks, because that's basically a facultative anaerobic fermentation that's going on in those. So, but yeah, I kind of feel it in a lot of ways that it's one of those products that there's a multitude of uses. So I have a farm here in Southern Oregon with my wife Gilly, and we have goats and pigs, and chickens and blah blah blah, and a bunch of fruit trees. I'm much more the plant person than the animal person, and definitely not a goat person, I can tell you that much. But for that's a longer story. But nevertheless, we use it in the animal pens, for bringing down odors, and like helping keep the flies down.
Yeah, that's
Feed
huge.
it to the animals as far as like a probiotic for the animals, especially if they have like mastitis, and when we're milking them, they have like infections and stuff, and start feeding them bokashi and help with that as far as giving probiotics that way. I had a buddy of mine who was raising He's raising Cornish chickens, which are really finicky. They're like the meat bird chickens, and like really finicky as far as when they're small, because they're kind of just like bred to grow fast, and
Yeah, my nephew does those.
and like so he was using Bokashi basically to feed to them initially instead of using antibiotics,
Oh, cool,
and having
cool.
really good success rates with that. So
Yeah.
it's like beyond the whole herb thing. Once again, it's like there's it's I mean, we use in our veggie garden here for all the tomatoes, a lot of like the brassicas, like the mustards and kales and broccolis and all that stuff. Those are all like bacterial oriented. They really don't need a fungal association.
What
Uh,
about pak choi?
Same as in Nebraska. Yeah, the
Good. I
cruciferous.
just planted some today. I'll inoculate.
There we go. Yeah, just and once again, it's like so. Yeah, do a little top dress, do teas with it. With the teas, I tend to tell people keep it off the keep it off the plant, and even with the top dress, keep it away from the base of the plant, like any other fertilizer or amendment. So, but I'm also kind of a worrywart when I tell people stuff because they're like, "Oh yeah, so it's like 1 ounce per this. I'll use like 10 ounces, and it works 10 times better." I'm like, nah,
Yeah.
not always the case. So, uh,
So, for this last part of the show, we're gonna ask you for some tips, for people if they wanted to kind of experiment with making their own bokashi.
sure.
So, yeah, to kind of start, what are some of the basic ingredients that is part of bokashi?
So if you want to like do a base style ingredient, essentially it's either rice or wheat mill run, which is typically a byproduct. So I use wheat mill run as my base for it, my base media. And that's a byproduct from the wheat industry. So, animal feed stores or, rice or wheat bran you can use too. And then molasses. It doesn't have to be organic, doesn't have to be unsulfured. Pretty much any molasses will work. Blackstrap molasses, etc. And then some type of EM culture. There's a bunch of different companies out there. Bokashi Earthworks might be one of them to really check out as far as somebody that's doing a good job with their cultures there.
Yeah, we're gonna have Brandon on here, I think, in a couple weeks.
Uh-oh.
It's always a good time.
All right,
It's always a good time.
but nevertheless, yeah. So they're a good company, and they definitely they have a good product there. There's a bunch of other people that do offer like EM type mother cultures as well. So the mixture between those is basically dilute was it one to one to 18 parts water, and basically like make a slurry out of that and then mix in your mill run. And you want it moist but not sopping wet. So like essentially if you had like a handful of the inoculated material, when you're mixing it up, squeeze it. If you have like dripping water that's way too wet, need to dry it out. So it's like kind of like it clumps, but it falls apart, essentially. 30% moisture content. And then pack it into.
So that's where the finger comes in, right?
Well, yeah. I mean, you could use 5 fingers or one. It depends. Depends on like how you feel that day. So, or two. It's like, burp, burp, burp. But so yeah, and then just once you get that moisture content correct, then just pack it into some type of sealed environment. I use 55-gallon drums here, as far as like ferment wise. So typically when we're running batches, it's about 4 tons at a time, of base product. And it's taking about like 3 hours to mix up and do the setup, clean up and mix and et cetera. So
After I put it in a container, like I've done this in the past and I put it in a bag, but I think if I were to do it again, I'd put it in something else. Like some sort of Tupperware container or something like that. But if I were to
5-gallon bucket.
Okay, yeah, 5-gallon bucket.
Yeah.
So I put it in there. How long do I have it in there? How long do I let it like do its thing?
That really depends on the temperature of like the ambient temperature, essentially. So there's a couple different ways that I kind of like I look at doing the bokashi. It's if it has a sweet sour smell to it, so it's typically I typically let my stuff ferment depending on ambient temperature, like 2 to 4 weeks. So 4 weeks during
Okay.
the winter time, when it's like my shop is maybe like 40 degrees, and then like during the summertime, like, like it was 100 degrees in there, and so, I mean, the sweet spot would probably be like 80, 85, if you hit that, like that'd be awesome, but, not really necessary. It's just more, just takes a little bit longer if it's colder. So in the springtime, I typically check for pH on things. Like if there's a couple indicators, pH being, like 3 below 4 is ideal because like you're in the lactic acid range when you're in the, below 4. 4 plus is usually yeast range. You want to be more like the 3.5 to 3.7, 3.8 range is my preferable area. Then you kind of look at the material. It will change color. We like the bins we use have they have they're allowed to or have the ability to release CO2 that's happening during the fermentation process, essentially. And so they can kind of breathe a little bit. So the top will kind of change color a little bit. So, and so the color can change. You'll start seeing some like white specks on there. And then also you have this like sweet sour smell.
Yeah.
It's like just kind of like silage, essentially, like kind of like some people hate it, some people love it. Luckily I like it. So
And so now that smell and that sweetness is kind of your indication that all your effective microorganisms are getting down and partying, right?
that is correct. Yeah, that the inoculation was good and that you're seeing that you're having basically the good bacteria are there and that you're getting the lactic acid. The sour is the lactic acid, basically, that's happening there. And then checking the pH too helps. I don't check pH during the middle of the summer because it's pretty much like, I inoculate pretty heavy. So it's pretty much tried and true at this point.
And so I'm the home user. What's going to be a really economic source for me to get my EMs, like an EM1 product or something like that?
I mean, it said, Google search can definitely help you. There, I used to go with Terraganics. They have Terraganics used to be in America. I am probably not going to go with them anymore because there was some inner politics that I didn't really appreciate that happened there. I know one of the owners personally, and that got booted after starting the company, and 20 years later, and not
Hail is
and
We
always
hear a lot
time.
of that.
Yeah.
Yeah, we hear a lot of that in our industry. Shocker.
Yeah, and I hate. I don't want to be part of the rumor mill. Put it that way.
Yeah, yeah,
I'll leave
yeah.
it there.
Yeah.
I'll leave it there to
Nice.
say
Leave it
like
there, please do.
I was not happy with kind of what happened, and from the one side of the story I heard, and so I'm like kind of like all right, but there's you can activate EM. So there's called activate EM. It's basically like a 1-to-1 to 18 or 20 parts of water, and with molasses. So it's 1 part EM, 1 part, molasses, and 18 to 20 parts water, lukewarm water, basically like bath water, temperatures in a ferment vessel. And that'll create a activated EM that you can stretch out that initial purchase, and that can, you got to wait about 7 to 10 days for that liquid to ferment, basically. And if you have some pH paper, that'd be awesome, to get it down to like 3.5, 3.7 range once again for the activated
So,
EM.
like, resource wise, a lot of the younger generation, they're trying to figure shit out and they're trying to be as sustainable in in their lifestyle as they can.
Sure.
And so I think one of the things I appreciate about all this conversation that we're having is you're teaching people how to be sustainable in an environment that can help them in a plethora of ways. I mean, you've mentioned already a bazillion different applications that you can do to improve your, even if you just got a small piece of property in a suburban area,
Yeah.
there's still a lot of applications that you can do and use this to kind of reduce what your waste is, first of all. And second of all, you're going to build and you're going to bring nutrients and richness to everything that's in your little zone.
Yeah.
And if everybody's doing that, then all the zones are nutrient rich and doing well. You know what I mean?
Oh, totally. I mean, like, well, it's, kind of jumping back a little bit, but Bokashi and EM came from Japan. Well, maybe initially Korea, but like, the Teruhiga or Dr. Teruhiga was the guy that came up with effective microorganisms, which is like the mother culture, the consortium they call it, the mixture of bacteria and fungi that Bokashi is typically made from. And like in Japan, they use it, once again in cities for composting, like for, like in the agricultural fields. Like they inoculate their riverways or waterways with it to help break down sediments and like settle, like to clean up waterways. I mean, it's like one of those things where I said before, a multitude of uses for, this product and other products that are like it, beyond just cannabis. And I feel it like there's always that like educational thing where, I hope that like yourself, JR, was just like, you're like, I was texting you earlier before we got this podcast, and you're like, oh, I'm starting to grow food, I'm like, fuck yeah, dude. Like, like putting squash in and starting to get like, utilizing that space and the knowledge base you have from being an herb grower, and be able to push plants now and grow other plants that'll, sustain other parts of your life, I guess, and bring other joy in there too, So
Well, if I can bring any kind of nutrient dense product to the table for my family to eat,
sure.
it's a win because we're pretty void of that, unless you're going to the farmer's market or your local farmer, which we always say, know your local farmer.
Yep.
You're hard pressed to find nutrient dense food.
And that's the thing too. It's like, and I feel that like, it's kind of to get on the soapbox again. It's like I feel that everybody can do this. Like as far as like grow plants, it's like like in even like a small environment of like a couple pots in a windowsill.
Yeah. Or even if hey, you're the guy in the neighborhood who could bang it out, support that guy,
Sure.
go
No,
hit him up.
totally.
You know what I mean?
Well, I think, and I think when COVID happened too, is like a lot of people understood that like the food system is jeopardized, pretty
Yeah.
quickly.
Word.
So not to get
Yeah.
in the whole
Right.
rabbit hole, but
Yeah.
but I just kind of see that where I'm just like, okay, like like we're gaining, there's a lot of population out there, and we have to, as every generation kind of continues, we're realizing that this is pretty much the only world we have. I mean, I know there's some people who keep on trying to go to the moon and other planets, being like, well,
Right.
we could go over there and
A
and
satellite
Well,
civilization.
make
I
it
Yeah.
think
stage
another
left,
thing is
so
they say that the largest farmable land is the American front and backyard,
yeah.
right?
Yeah, no, full. I mean, it's like, and a lot of people are like, why? I mean, the idea of growing grass in like Phoenix or these like desert environments to
Waste.
have like
And then putting it all in the bag and then taking it away.
yeah, pulling nutrients out of there, like feeding
Right.
synthetic fertilizers that are gonna salt the field basically, and then throwing everything in the landfill for it to create methane, and you're just kind of like, well, and then you're paying, then you go to the grocery store to buy food. You're like, well, wait a second, like,
Yeah.
Yeah.
there's got to be another way.
No, I see
I can't keep up the Joneses anymore, so
So,
Right.
so on the topic of during the pandemic, I experimented with making my own bokashi during the pandemic.
Okay.
Because I had some like EM1 left over. Because for a while I was like kind of buying it on a regular basis or whatever.
Sure.
And so I did the what you were saying earlier, extended it. You could just put. I think I just did it in like a milk jug or whatever.
Yeah.
And then on the brand side of thing, in terms of like what did I use as the what do you want to call it, substrate or something like that, for the bokashi. I live near Napa, so I went to like a beer grain store and got some grain there. But I'm just adding another story here, hopefully for people that are watching, to just show like you can experiment with this stuff, and it is like what he's talking about is like a few basic ingredients and you throw it together, and then you just kind of let it do its thing, and it comes out with something that's great that you can use in everything. I used it in my worm bin, used it as like top dressing, like you were saying. It's very useful.
Yeah. I mean, it's, like there's, kind of jumping back into that aspect of things where it's like, there's people who use like newspaper for media, which I've never done. I've used rice hulls, which it seemed to me this has been years and years ago that it didn't work too well. I don't think the nutrient source was quite there.
Yeah,
I've done alfalfa, like alfalfa meal before. That smells like cat piss, but it works freaking great.
I can
So
imagine it's
yeah, it's just
loaded,
like all that
right?
ammonia is just like
It's probably
woo.
juiced up.
Yeah, yeah. And then like, biochar is another one, activating biochar.
oh wow, yeah,
Like there, there's definitely a lot of things you get creative with. I mean, basically look at any like waste resource and be like, essentially like chip it up ideally. I mean, people use manures and that's the other thing is like you can inoculate manures, and basically like use that as long as it's got like not as long as it's not sopping wet and it's got like, like the right moisture content, maybe like a little aeration for the, things to work out, like it'll do, it's like you can get definitely pretty creative and create once again, kind of like as you're talking about, JR with like, making these like maybe not a leachate, but making like a fertilizer, like a activated fertilizer style with it.
totally.
So the world's your oysters.
So
Right, yeah. Well, hey, speaking of my oyster, outside my house, I have equal parts wheelbarrow loads of composted horse manure
Okay.
and wood chips. And I've kind of put those all together. And then I added 200 gallons of my used living soil in all of that. And then I kind of blended all of that together. And so now I could go in with my Bokashi and just kind of, because I checked
For the
it,
love.
it was super hot for a while, but it
Okay.
seems to be cooling down a bit.
Yep.
So is now when I'd want to go in and hit it with my Bokashi and then put my tarp down?
I'm assuming this means spread the love.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's how we do it.
Yeah, I would. Just a word of caution I would say about horse manure, particularly down here in Southern Oregon. Like we have issues with synphylins, which is basically like a centipede type.
Jumping worm? Is that jumping worm thing?
It's I don't know if that's a common name for it, synphylids or synphylum, or it's basically or it's essentially it's like a small kind of white centipede that's and this is probably horrible because it's like oh it's this big and it basically like horse manure and wood chips it loves. So just be careful because it once you get it in your soils, particularly if you're bringing it in your indoor soils, I would just be cautious.
No. This
Okay.
would all be for outdoor garden for my
Okay.
garden next. It's
Yeah.
prepping for next year's garden.
Okay, 10-4. Yeah, yeah, so yeah, because the synphylids are they're a pain in the ass to get rid of. They basically eat the rootlets and shit, and it's yeah, they're
You don't want that.
yeah. We have them here just because we had a horse. It was a horse property beforehand, and we just kind of deal with it, But they
So I'll
definitely
just be looking for the white centipede looking thing.
yeah. I'll see if I can find you a link and I can text it to you. But anyways, yeah. So this would kind of be the time to throw out some bokashi on there. I would say it depends on how much because horse manure is pretty low NPK depending how fresh it is.
It's composted. It's already been composted. Like
It's
it smells like earth. It doesn't
okay.
smell like shit.
Are you and what kind of chips are you doing? What kind of wood chips are they?
They are oak chips from the tree that just got chipped behind my house.
Okay. So I would say, if you're kind of breaking new ground there, as far as like, creating a new bed or something like
Yes, I
that.
am. It is. It's new.
Okay. So I would say, is there grass there? Is there like any like,
It's kind of like fenced and walled all around. It's got its own little dedicated area.
but are you like eliminating grass or like some type of weed or something to create this bed? Or it's just like a raised bed style that you're backfilling?
It's just that it was scraped bare earth
Oh,
that
it's
I
right there. Okay.
started.
So I would say
Which
like,
I'd say is clay, of course. Clay here.
yeah, clay, which Bokashi actually works really well for bringing up that clay.
Oh, really cool.
Yeah, totally. So yeah, so I would say yeah, probably a good time to add the Bokashi there to it. I've found that one of the areas I lived at, we inoculated this guy's ganja beds. They were raised beds with soilless media, and he was at like 2,000 feet and went and like We inoculated them in like November, and it was still live in like February after going through like 8 degrees temps.
Wow.
You
Wow.
know,
Okay, good.
like 8 or 10 degree temps. So I mean, they probably weren't happy, but they were, still showing some activity. And depending on how much wood chip to, compost manure you're adding, because it seems like you might to compost that wood chip out, it seems like you might need some nitrogen there.
Okay.
That would be my suggestion on it. Like maybe
All
get some
right.
chicken or something, because like if not, you're gonna be pulling nitrogen from your plants with all that like kind of like carbon based, because once again the horse manure is not gonna have a lot, especially if it's been already composted out.
Yeah, it's
Compost will help
Inco.
kind of start facilitating things, but it's not gonna do much. So in case in point too, like the reason why I was asking about like what you're kind of dealing with as far as like the area that you're trying to, break ground on, so to say.
Yeah.
So with the smart pots I have, the 400-gallon smart pots, as I told my worker, Evan in the fall fucked Evan in the spring by leaving the irrigation drip line in on top of the smart pots, and like 4 foot tall grass grew in. So
Oh,
yeah, and I was like, son of a gun, and I'm like trying to like weed it out. And there's 10 of them, and like got like a million other freaking chores to do, and make bokashi. And so what we ended up doing was basically weed whacking down all the grass and just dropping it, pulling the irrigation out, using wet bokashi, which is basically the pre-dried form of it, which is a bit more
oh, okay.
active. And
Right, right.
so we basically smother the top of the pots with leaving all the grass roots and the grass and clippings and everything there, threw the wet bokashi on, threw down some panda plastic on some of them and some polywoven road cloth or weed mat, 10 mil stuff on top, and threw pallets on each of the pots just because I'm in a windy area. Waited about like a month and a half, and it was, a month and a half, 2 months, and because it was pretty cold out, and pulled the tarps back, and it was like the bokashi had gone through and eaten up all the grass, all the grass rootlets and everything, and basically you just didn't have to like weed anything out, just tilled in the amendment, my amendment package I usually do, the dry amendment package, in there, made a donut hole of fresh soil, planted the plant, and put the irrigation
So it
back
was
in.
already supercharged, ready to go.
It was
Everything had
no
already been broken down, made available. And
worms
so your
wasn't there.
homeboy who made this horrible mistake ended up like turning out to be kind of a blessing in the end, almost, right?
Well, I mean, yeah, Evan in the fall time didn't fuck Evan in the springtime too hard. So I guess is that kind of where you're getting to. And I've had there's actually this other girl that I knew that she was using kind of the same concept, but for her garden beds, so she was using essentially like the what do you call them, the big billboard, the vinyl billboards, to get rid of those
Oh
like
yeah, I see those for on sale. Yeah.
yeah, so she was using that in her veggie beds and basically inoculating bokashi, just spreading love as you were doing,
Hmm.
and basically inoculating underneath there, and just over grass, etc. Like mowing stuff down, nubbing it down the ground, leaving everything there, throwing out bokashi, covering it for a little while, a couple
Let
weeks,
it do its thing.
pull
Yeah.
it back, and then like doing planting. And she had areas where like say like certain plants like dock that have a deeper taproot, etc. Were there, she'd kind of do spot treatments with bokashi and cover it back over and it would eat it up. So it just yeah, I mean in your circumstance where it's scraped, I would say maybe better to do raised beds, truthfully, because if not, you're gonna be contending with that like packed soil, and just build up from there. And plus, it's better for your back as being the young man that we all are.
Right.
So,
Beauty.
because well, you
Word.
have kids, don't you? You have
All
kids.
grown and out, but
Uh,
I'm raising an 8-year-old now.
oh, perfect. He's gonna be perfect height for that, man. He's like,
Yep.
go out there and weed that damn pen, and yeah.
Yeah.
Uh, so yeah, yeah, that'd be my suggestion on it. So,
Awesome. Well, my last question, and then we're gonna it'll be the last question for the show, is where can people learn more about you? Where can people check out your products? You've been talking about it. I'm
sure.
interested in it. Where can people go and grab some?
So I have a website. It's sobokashi.com. So sobokashi.com. And there's a shopping cart there. We have a couple different sizes that are available of the dry product. if you're, like I said, to do free shipping on them, it's super reasonable as far as, I think I said JR a 10 pounder, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, you did.
So, I
Thank
mean,
you very
that'll,
much.
no worries, bud. I'm glad you use it.
Yeah, no, for real.
So like the 3 pounder, like these guys here, the 3 pound gusseted bag, like we have these on there, but also, 6 pounds, 10 pounds, and 40 pounds as well. And so like something like this for like, I think it's $25 if you're doing 6 plants indoor. This would pretty much run you the whole cycle, and as far as indoor style. And then I have an Instagram account. There's also Bokashi. I am horrible about doing Instagram posts. It's
But you do respond to messages.
I do respond to messages. I've been trying to do my due diligence, and I feel like a dinosaur sometimes when it comes to technology. Where people are like, I was on Facebook, 15 plus years ago, and then got off it. And I got a message from, I just checked it recently, and I was like, some guy like 7 years ago was like, hey, da 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 da. And I like just got it. I'm like, oh dude, I'm so sorry. It's been 7 years. Like, so Instagram, much better. Facebook, so yeah, Bokashi on Instagram. And also got the Triple Nipple Homestead on Instagram as well, which is like kind of more homestead pictures like of like, pomegranates and you know, ducks and stuff like that,
Cool.
Other geeky obsession, cacti, so
Awesome.
yeah.
Well, thank you so much for spending the afternoon with us talking
Yeah,
about
thank you.
Bokashi.
Yeah.
You've got me thinking about how I could use it indoors, outside with because I have 30-gallon pots. I could use it in the winter to help get them ready for the next cycle. There's some
Yep.
really cool things that I could do with, so I'm going to be using your tips for sure. So thanks so much, Evan. Thanks, JR, for putting together the questions today. I appreciate it. We've got more episodes on the way. We've got interviews pretty much weekly booked for the foreseeable future. And then you've also been uploading your own videos on our YouTube channel. So if you're if you for whatever reason only listen on podcasts or Spotify or whatever, go to our YouTube channel. JR has been uploading some cool stuff on there too.
Yeah. I did some small farm seminars from Oregon State University here locally, did one. So I hopped in on some soil classes and was able to record. And then Brandon Hudson from Kiss Organics did some limiting factors in organic systems that we uploaded there. So yeah, check those out.
Yeah.
Hey,
really
and while
great
we're
stuff.
at it, this is the one thing we never say for those few people who hang to the very end. We really appreciate you. And shop.cannabis.app. We have some gear there. If you want to rock a hat or if you want to rock a shirt, hit us up.
Awesome, guys. Well, thank you so much for listening. Thanks so much for watching. Smash the like and subscribe button and all those things. And as always, JR, growers love. Peace all.
Thanks, guys.